Final item is we're calling it a spotlight on innovation. And it's a conversation between Pat Lowe, who's the Senior Manager of Partnerships, Innovation, Research and Development at IESO, and Shivam Saxena, who's the President of Hero Energy and Engineering. So Pat and Shivam will be chatting for about half an hour or so, and then we'll try to save 10 or 15 minutes at the end for some questions from the audience. So again, just a reminder on how you can do that. You can use the questions feature to submit questions to us, and then you can also choose to raise your hand if you like, and then we'll do our best to call on you and have you unmuted to pose a question to Pat and Shivam. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pat and Shivam. Take it away, please.
Colin. You know, when we're sitting around the virtual table at the ISO, really think about who can we invite to chat about innovation. Without a doubt in my mind, it was going to be Shivam. And when it comes to innovation, especially around electric vehicles and concepts like blockchain, I've had multiple conversations before about these really interesting topics, but never have I had a conversation as in depth with Shivam. And he was able to really bring something unique that I haven't heard before. So for everybody that's still sticking around, you're going to love this conversation. I know you're going to learn a lot. Every time I talk to Shivam, I'm always learning something new, something different. So with that said, as introductions, Shivam Saxena is the president of Hero Energy and Engineering. So it's a smart grid solutions company focused on DER management and transactive energy. Over the course of his 10-year career, Shivam has developed over 30 smart grid projects right across North America, including first of its kind demonstration projects using Internet of Things and blockchain. And just as a fun fact, Shivam recently completed his PhD where his research focused on distributed control and communication of DERs for grid services. So Shivam, you ready to take this home?
Absolutely. Thanks, Pat, for having me. I'm excited to be here and it's a great honor for me. Thank you.
So, you know, over the course of the time during our collaboration on our Grid Innovation Fund project, I got to learn a little bit about you. And something that's really interesting is that you almost stumbled upon this career in energy. So just for the audience to get to know you a little bit, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you was able to get into the sector?
Right. I think stumbling is a pretty accurate way of putting it, Pat. So just for context, way back in 2015, I hadn't started Hero yet. In fact, I graduated with my master's in smart grids. I studied DERs and microgrids. I had a decent academic understanding of what those meant, but it was never fully able to understand the complexity in their management. So at that point, I felt like I was at a crossroads in my career because I could take this newfound academic knowledge, perhaps pursue a career in the LDCs, or go back to where I came from, which was hardcore systems engineering and software development. Unfortunately, I felt like I needed to make a choice between the two. Just by chance, I got the opportunity to visit the Courtright Center, and this is a microgrid operated by the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority in Vaughan. Encourage all of you to go out there. It's absolutely beautiful. 3 to 4 acres of land, 50 kilowatt solars, another 30 kilowatt of wind, and 4 smart homes that are prototypical of what smart homes in the future might look like. Smart thermostats, smart lighting, everything connected. And as I was walking through the microgrid, I started to gain a very deep appreciation for the complexities of DERs, not only the services they can provide, as Randolph was talking about this moment, but also the issues that they cause for LDCs and system operators at the grid. It was interesting, I was walking through the microgrid and one of the dashboards was not working. So I managed to go to the lead technical person and I introduced myself. I asked if I could have a look at the dashboard and potentially use my experience to fix it. And he said, well, I have to get out of here in 2.5 hours. So if you can fix it, you can take a crack at it. So within an hour and a half, I managed to fix most of the issues there. And at that moment, I had a moment of clarity because using my software engineering background with DERs, I understood that this is where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And that's where Hero Engineering came from.
So one thing that I've always loved about your company is the name and as well kind of the service. So why don't you tell them a little bit more about Hero Engineering, how you landed on the name and all the different projects that you've done before?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name actually comes from my wife. She's also an engineer. We're both very passionate about climate change and power system sustainability. We also really enjoy movies. So within movies, we see heroes. They face insurmountable odds. At this rate, we feel it's going to take a heroic effort by all of us across the energy value chain to solve these climate change issues, the power system sustainability issues. So she's the one that gave us the name Hero Engineering. And it's a testament to the amount of work that we need to put in to solve these problems. When it comes to our journey, we've been very fortunate to do a number of very innovative projects, primarily behind the meter. I'm very happy that they align with some of the concepts that Randolph and our panelists were talking about today when it comes to DER coordination and the grid services they provide. Most of our work and our software that we're looking to commercialize focuses on enabling DERs to provide grid services and also focusing on the social, technical, economic barriers that those are providing. We're very fortunate to get the support of NRCan, ISO Grid Innovation Fund as well to fund these projects. I'll briefly touch on two projects that even Randolph was referencing. And what was valuable about them is that they are reminiscent of our power system, what they might look like in 5 years. The Corewright microgrid I was referencing earlier has about 80 kilowatts of renewables, but only a peak load of 10 to 15 kilowatts. So on hot summer days, the generation is far outpacing the load and the voltage is completely out of control. There's so much excess power in that microgrid that there's been smoke, fire, the inverters have tripped. So it's really a reminder that yes, DERs are a wonderful enabler of grid services, but if we don't coordinate them properly, it's a real headache for not only the DER owners, aggregators, but also the LDCs and the system operators. There, we were able to use the inverter, the reactive power ability of the inverter to provide voltage control and power quality improvements in that microgrid. And not only that, we were able to couple it with an up-and-coming technology called the Internet of Things, which focuses on extremely distributed, secure, and scalable communication. Sometimes it's not enough for the inverter or the DER in this case, just to take decisions based on dispatch. It has to have some local intelligence and coordinate locally with other DERs. Another topic we focused on was mixed aggregation. In this case, we designed control algorithms that the DERs can use to communicate amongst each other and solve problems locally that not only protect the resilience of their microgrid, but also enhance the service and operation for the upstream power system. The other brief thing I'd like to touch on was peer-to-peer energy trading. It's a common misconception. People think that peer-to-peer energy trading cuts out the LDCs, and there's a serious problem with that. On the other hand, we found that a peer-to-peer energy trading system that is supported by LDCs, in fact, a utility-operated peer-to-peer energy trading system, can correct power mismatches like the ones that we faced at the Corewright microgrid. In a simulated study, we find if we want to electrify our transport and our heating, the peak load of a residential community may be 120 kilowatts, and the transformer serving it is only 50. It will require hundreds of millions of capital to upgrade the grid. And by putting a system like we demonstrated at the Corewright microgrid powered by blockchain, we were able to reduce that from 120 to 50, which means that LDCs will not need to upgrade the grid just by installing that system. So that's kind of our claim to fame. It was the first peer-to-peer blockchain-based energy trade in Ontario, and we're happy to continue on our journey with the ISO Grid Innovation Fund.
So that project's actually integrated with an LDC right now, and an LDC's piloting it?
Right, we have LDC involvement, but it's completely behind the meter. So we simulated the LDC signals. As people noted, the LDC control rooms are not quite capable at this moment to communicate behind the meter for these types of small scale projects. So we're looking forward to implement that in the future.
Yeah, and one of the projects I know you're working with the Grid Innovation Fund. We're going to chat about this, but this is where I'm going to do a quick plug. You heard from Catherine, you heard from Kieran. Really excited this year for the Grid Innovation Fund. We're issuing a target call for DERs in collaboration with the OEB Sandbox, Innovation Sandbox. So stay tuned this afternoon. You're going to hear more from Nima Micic and as well Rachel Anderson from the OEB. But let's go right into it. Grid Innovation Project, Shivam, why don't you tell us what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. We're focused on V2G, vehicle to grid technology, where we take the onboard capacity of a vehicle and discharge to that grid. Broadly, we're looking at V2G with three kind of aspects: technical, economical, and social. When it comes to technical, we're focused on mixed aggregation. So there's a lot of commentary in the morning as well as from our panelists about barriers. We're looking to figure out how V2G can be mixed with other DERs and provide that as a bundled, valued service to the grid, primarily in the form of demand response, both to the LDC as well as the ISO. There's some serious problems when it comes to mixed aggregation. The rules of the game are not quite consistent across jurisdictions. So we're looking to see exactly what the complexities are with V2G, especially the performance of battery in extreme weather conditions. So as a potential aggregator, if we're having a capacity of, let's say, 1 megawatt and 250 kilowatts is through V2G, and it's a really, really cold day out there, what happens if we're not able to provide that exact power that we considered just because the battery isn't working to optimal conditions? So what kind of lessons learned can we disseminate based on that, and what the aggregator has to do to hedge on that? So that's a big focus of our project. When it comes to economical, we're worried about the incentives. This aligns really well with what Catherine and Kieran were talking about in the morning. When it comes to regulatory, at this moment, distribution level services for DERs don't exist. So what incentive does an EV owner expect for providing the service to the grid? They're worried essentially about how it's going to affect their battery and how they should be compensated for that. So if an LDC is providing this as a compensatory service, does that fit in their rate base? Does it not? And what's feasible for both parties? And the third part, which is social and is really interesting, comes to user privacy. Data is, as we know, taking over the entire world. Its implications are huge. And there's a huge market for EV owner data, collecting and selling. Make no mistake, people are knowing when you charge, where you charge, your locations. There's some security and privacy issues. Previously, if you look at 15-minute kind of energy measurements of your home, people can generally tell what you're doing. Now, with your electric vehicle, they know when you're in the house, when you're out of the house as well. So we're doing some surveys to figure out what people's pulse is on what they'll allow to be collected, what they'll allow to be sold. And that's a big issue, and we feel that's a barrier to adoption as well.
And I know one element of the project is blockchain, and this is a term that has started bubbling and emerging, especially in the utilities sector. For all those here who are not familiar with blockchain, do you want to kind of give a bit of an overview about blockchain and applications for the sector as well?
Absolutely, sure. So blockchain is nothing but a big, giant ledger of transactions. So if we go into our banking system, for example, we log into our checking account, we have credit, debit balance, and a nice transparent history of how we spent our money. What's important to understand is that your bank is in complete control of that. They authenticate you when you log in, they validate your money against the transactions, and then they finally debit or credit your account. So we implicitly trust that the bank will do right by us. Blockchain removes that trust factor. What it does is it states that there's no one person that's in control of the transactions. Instead, we have a set of trusted people, or perhaps everybody in the network, that are going to do those three functions. They're going to authenticate, validate, and then finally store that on the transaction. The issue here is about trust. If you implicitly trust the person that you're interacting with, there's no need for a blockchain. Now we can see how trust is applied to power systems. This is our kind of take on it, and kind of an answer to your question. We view trust as reliability and an acceptable power quality of service. As we mentioned, and everybody mentioned this morning, power system operators are going to rely on DERs to provide services to the grid. Those services need to be accountable. They need to have standards of performance. And now that means that previously, if we trusted the LDC or the IESO to provide reliability to the entire power system, we can't necessarily do that anymore because there's so many DERs that are being connected, especially at the grid edge. They have a direct sort of impact on the reliability. So that trust factor is very relevant. Now, if we have a ledger of transactions, we see new actors that are coming into the energy value chain. DER aggregators, mobile service providers, all these sorts of actors, they're touching your DERs in various ways to monetize and provide services to the grid. There needs to be some level of transparency, observability, and accountability. And blockchain is a good way to do that because it puts all the transactions on a distributed ledger and lets people validate them against actual service and performance guarantees. So that's a little bit of how V2G, we're looking to trial blockchain basically in two aspects. One, as people have noted, when there's V2G, there might be an increased degradation of your battery. Now, as you take your vehicle from different points in Ontario different charge point operators will use your electric vehicle to provide services in different ways. Now, if you have a conversation with your warranty and they claim after 5 years that your battery's messed up or it's degraded, who's responsible for that? Without a blockchain, you're gonna have a tough time figuring out and proving who did what, but in a transparent ledger scenario, the data is right there for you to do, so it reduces that friction. And finally, when it comes to user privacy, we're interested in taking consent of EV owners, the consent to collect data, the consent to sell, the consent to authorize people to do that. If we can track that as a kind of transparent thing on the ledger and see how that changed, then we can prove to EV owners that yes, you're in control of your data, and that will in turn increase the adoption of EV owners and V2G services.
So are we looking at then a new way of contracting, something that's a lot faster, a lot quicker, more private, more efficient?
Absolutely, yeah. So you touched on some great aspects there. When we combine data together and they're not in independent silos, the ISO has their own database, all the LDCs, the regulator. If we're putting certain sections of that data in a ledger, we have access to that data that's quicker, it reduces administrative charges, and the transparency of the data also promotes people to trust in the system. Everybody's in it together.
Does anybody own this data then?
Sorry?
Would anybody own this data?
So that's a very interesting question, and I really think the regulatory has to weigh in on that. In California, we see that any data produced behind the meter is exclusively the users. But now with the introduction of transactive energy and the DERs providing the service, you have different service providers that are touching that data. Now, do they have a claim on that data? Nobody knows. But with blockchain, what you can do is you can assign different levels of access to that data that can be transparently recorded. So for example, if I'm a V2G participant and I don't mind various data merchants monetizing my data, I can authorize that through blockchain through different levels of control. So it is a way of empowering users and allowing people to own their data and use it for the services that they intend.
Okay, fascinating. So just taking a step back, how'd you know about the fund, or where'd you hear about the Grid Innovation Fund? And like I said, we're really excited for this particular project.
Right, of course. So I actually heard about the Grid Innovation Fund earlier. It was the ISO Conservation Fund, I believe. It was about 3 or 4 years earlier. We applied for a couple of projects. We didn't get approved. But what was unique about that project was the fact that we got really excellent feedback. Our strengths, our weaknesses, what we missed. We not only utilized that feedback to get grants from other funding agencies, but when we came back and it turned into the Grid Innovation Fund and there was a lot more alignment of our hopes and objectives, we used that to get this project in V2G. And at this point, I just like to take 1 second because to appreciate the wonderful job that the GIF team has done. They've had answers for all our questions. They've been extremely helpful. I'd like to give individual shout outs. Nima Micic, yourself, Pat Lowe, there's Ilyas Ahmed, Maral Kasabi, and of course, Catherine Sparks. You've been a wonderful team, and I'm really looking forward to participating more in this project.
Yeah, thanks. And like, I'm really pleased. I think they're kind of the best in the business. That's
no doubt.
Bias there too.
No doubt.
I'm sure the team loves getting the shout out as well too. So I want to kind of touch upon the surveys thing, and I think the survey is really interesting because we're going out there and we're talking to customers that we never had access before. And so do you want to kind of mention, like, how did you go about getting the survey done when it comes to electric vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think Kara touched on this earlier. It's important to measure the willingness of people to participate in these services. And we have to talk to EV owners. So we designed this survey to get a pulse for what their willingness is to participate in V2G, what incentive they might expect for that service, and of course, to evaluate how they kind of figure out what their issues with data privacy are. So the standard ways are go through LinkedIn and going through various different channels to access these people. But we found a lot of success on social media, Facebook and Reddit. And we've actually got about 85% of our survey target almost done. There's a whole bunch of people that are willing to participate. In fact, this project aims to be Ontario's first blockchain-based V2G public demonstration. So we do want you guys to come out, and try this at our location in Markham in partnership with Sky Clean Energy, who's the PI of this project. But the surveys have come from a wide variety of sources: Facebook, Reddit, LinkedIn, as well as personal endorsement. And the findings have been absolutely mesmerizing so far.
I think Reddit is the most interesting, given the fact that I'm not sure here as the sector how engaged we're in the Reddit space community. A little bit volatile depending on who you're talking to. How did you find those customers there? How did you find the interaction on Reddit?
So on Reddit, we found a lot of the younger generation. We do have a space in the EV. If you don't necessarily have an EV, you can still participate in the survey. So that is definitely valuable to us. We found most of our respondents from Reddit to not actually have electric vehicles. We found most of our electric vehicle owners to come from Facebook, perhaps because Facebook has been around longer, so people are more comfortable on it. So there's a lot of Facebook groups out there that are looking to provide their results. But so far, we see a lot of really positive reinforcement. And specific to Reddit, we see a lot more willingness to participate rather than some of the other social media platforms that we've been on.
And then what would you say, like the owners or the EV owners, are they really passionate about their vehicles? Are they, like what is their outlook generally with electric vehicles themselves?
They're very, very passionate about their vehicles. That's the reason they're making Facebook groups, and they have webinars. We're partnering with the EV Society of Canada as well. We've been invited to give a webinar there. And they're all about increasing the adoption because they believe in fighting climate change, and electrifying transport is a big reason of that. So I find that they're extremely passionate about it. Some of that trickles down into the integration with the grid. Some more than the other are interested in monetizing that, in playing a better part in acting as a DER and providing services to the grid. Some are so passionate and want to protect their investment that they have serious reservations about participating in V2G and its effect on the degradation of the battery. So we are finding a little bit of pushback, but the overwhelming response that we get so far is we're passionate about electric vehicles. We want to be part of this, but we need more pilots to figure out what are the social, technical barriers that we need to address. So there's a willingness to participate, but not yet to commit.
What incentives then would they be looking at? And I think that was part of the survey questions, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a wide range of incentives. They range from, standard payments, $500 a year, all the way to a little bit more conceptual, such as free EV charging year round. And it really depends. Different EV people want different things. Sometimes it's not a question of incentive, it's also about convenience, right? So if we think about how future V2G contracts might look like, we view fixed contracts versus no contracts. Fixed contracts are more preferable for LDCs in the IESO because you would give kind of a plug-in schedule. Say, oh, I'm willing to plug in at this time. These are my general work hours or home hours. And if you don't plug in at that time, maybe there's a penalty, but the incentive would be a lot higher. But then your convenience is really restricted. You can't just jump in your vehicle and go anywhere if you have to follow a schedule. The other option is no contract, where you do some sort of arbitrage. Maybe you charge at the off-peak hours, you sell back to the grid at on-peak hours. Lower incentive, but ultimate convenience. So we are finding that people are increasingly putting more emphasis not on the incentive itself, but on their convenience. People are more going towards a no contract type thing where they can jump in their car and do whatever they need, provided that the incentive is okay enough. The baseline thing that we're getting from the surveys, though, is as long as LDCs or whoever's administering the program can spring for a new battery by the time 5-6 years are over, they're willing to commit.
So when you say spring for a new battery, willing to pay for a portion of the battery or pay for the capacity of the battery, or just basically give them a new battery as a reimbursement?
Give them a new battery as a reimbursement.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. So is that in partnership then with the manufacturers then? Like let's say a Nissan, and I know Nissan's one of the ones that are kind of moving a little bit further when it comes to vehicle grid. Would they want or expect LDCs to partner with the Nissan then for a type of program?
I think so. I think that would increase the adoption of their product, right? And to provide these sort of bundled services to the grid would be amazing. Nissan Leaf is currently the only one that in their warranty, they provide provisions for V2G. So our partner, Sky Clean Energy, has done a great job. They have 5 V2G stations across Ontario. They've also leased Nissan Leafs. For those of you that are hopefully willing to come in and try out our testing station, we provide both standard charging. So that's, you can use your own vehicle, but if you do want to try the V2G version, we have the leased vehicles that you can try, and we're looking for your feedback. And there are examples of even other car manufacturers selling capacity to system operators. In 2016, the CAISO, California System Operator, they partnered with BMW to provide 100 kilowatts of capacity at any point. And that was provided, I believe, 130 out of the 134 times. So pretty good reliability. So there are already precedent for this type of services happening. Not for V2G at the moment. Nissan Leaf is kind of leading that, but it will in the future.
That's really fascinating. Like, I guess we're going to be looking at new models, I guess, with different entities to really get this thing going.
Yeah.
So let's talk about privacy a little bit. And you hinted about this privacy, and I know we're kind of environment where we're more sensitive to our data. Like, for instance, I'm migrating out of WhatsApp, and I know a lot of people are abandoning WhatsApp just because this privacy issue here too. How are you viewing the EV owners within this type of environment of more protection around data?
Right. EV owners are particularly sensitive, I think, because your vehicle is mobile, right? So through any point in time, it's possible to track where you're going, what you're doing. A really interesting, relevant comparison is bike shares. Not many people know that the revenue from bike shares, more than 50%, is not from the bike itself. It's from the targeted ads, because they know where the bikes are. So they'll sell the data of who you are, what you're doing, what you're more relevant to purchase, and sell that data out and make some money from it, right? So from EV owners, we look at the types of data that they might be sensitive to, both privacy and security issues. You can tell, when you're trying to charge your vehicle, when you're not, when you're at home, what are your favorite charging locations. That can be aggregated and profiled and then sold to EV manufacturers, perhaps to the places you visit, targeted ads, all these things. And according to our survey, it becomes some people view it as a strict invasion of privacy, right? People don't want that stuff to be known about them. When it comes to a business perspective, if we're talking about V2G and essentially saying a car is a battery on wheels, is it possible that we can provide locational-based demand response or even locational-based arbitrage? In this case, maybe I don't want to reveal where my favorite charging spots are, where I'm getting the best deals, right? So all this stuff needs to be somewhat protected or governed. And there's two kind of takeaways from that. We noticed that even Canada is tightening their privacy laws. PIPEDA is being replaced by new legislature that was late last year. The consumers have an increased granular way to consent to not only different people touching their data, collecting it, aggregating and selling it. And the most important thing is following from Europe's GDPR legislation. It's also about the right to forget. The consumer can tell anybody collecting data about them, I don't want to be in your system, stop tracking data about me. If you have anything in there, delete it immediately. And if a company fails to comply with that, there are significant fines that might be 3% of their global revenue or in the millions of dollars. So these are really kind of interesting things that affect us as DER owners or even as EV owners. And the takeaway from our survey so far is generally people are okay with EVSE or maybe DER aggregators collecting their data, aggregating it, but they are not at all comfortable with that data being sold.
Right.
A portion of our survey respondents are comfortable if they get a piece of the revenue, but again, how to govern that is a very, very complex thing. So these are some of the implications that we feel. Who knows, you could monetize your DERs, it could be a secondary revenue stream. But again, we need to protect the EV owners or DER owners in the future in this case.
Okay. So Shevin, what do you say we take a couple of questions on the audience?
Sure, absolutely, I'd love to.
So Brian Works says that vehicle to grid has little to no value. Batteries are so cheap enough and now have 7,000 cycle, 20-year lifespan. This essentially kills vehicle to grid. Why deploy all that vehicle to grid when you can deploy a few batteries? So any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, batteries aren't locational. right? We have the power to harness electric vehicles as a mobile source, right? So we can imagine actual locational based demand response to high service areas, maybe a hospital, or perhaps your community needs islanding. It's possible to take EVs from a different source, fleet that has a high rate of charge, and provide that service to increase the responsibility and reliability in the grid. So that would be that's the biggest value of a battery on wheels. And that would be my answer to your question.
Right. One thing about that too, so you kind of mentioned that like a lot of the vehicle to grid owners, or sorry, the EV owners, they want the flexibility. So how do you make sure that's reliable? Like when we need it at, let's say, at a hospital, for instance, right? That they will all show up, given the fact that the biggest thing about them is just flexibility. They want to drive it whenever it's convenient for them.
Yeah, it's a great point, Pat. So again, it's about those contracts, right? So if you sign in, I mean, what does a parameter of a typical EV contract look like? The biggest parameter is minimum driving range. That can be a function of the percentage of the battery or just the range that you feel you need to get to your next destination. Maybe it's 30 kilometers, 50 kilometers, whatever it is. So if you specify that in a contract, especially in a blockchain scenario where that contract can now be validated by everybody, the DER vendor or the DERMS vendor that's actually looking to provide that service to the LDC, as well as the LDC that's utilizing in their future planning, right? If we're taking that parameter, we can ensure that whatever algorithm that's using to charge or discharge your vehicle is respected at all times. So that's the parameter that's used. And again, if it's on a blockchain and everybody's validating that in real time, we can ensure that from both ways, the preferences are respected. Once you hit the 30-kilometer mark, we're not touching your vehicle. Yeah. And from the hospital point of view, from the remaining fleets, this is what more flexibility you actually have.
Okay. Good thoughts on that one. So we got another question from Ashkan. Shivam, when you deploy your IoT solutions for the pilot projects, what challenges do you face in the course of implementation and deployment?
Yeah, excellent question. First thing has to do with the DER manufacturers themselves. They are still going through a lot of remote firmware upgrades, and sometimes they don't communicate with us when they're doing those upgrades. So that becomes an issue. So, we have our control algorithm, it's set, it's automated, ready to go, and some firmware upgrades knock us out for a couple of hours, and we essentially do not have control of that microgrid. So that was a significant barrier. The second is these things are still being standardized. Some different manufacturers of DERs, inverters, for example, they don't conform to interoperability standards. So what we view as 61850 or a SunSpec, it's very easy for these inverters, for us as DER vendors, DERMS vendors, to plug and play those inverters. When we're working with other inverters that don't follow those standards, there's a lot of kind of manual troubleshooting we need to go to get them into action. So that interoperability is an issue. And the third one, specifically because you asked about IoT and distributed control algorithms. Again, when we talk about distributed control, one of the main issues from a mathematical perspective is the ordering of the messages. When we have a centralized command dispatch, the centralized person's in charge of validating that the messages are in order. When you're using distributed IoT-based situations, there's no centralized broker that's going to do that. So there's a step that we need to take to make sure that all the messages are in sync and they're in order. So when different DERs come online and offline, they're not acting on outdated messages that could mess up our control algorithm. That's a significant IoT-based challenge in reference to what you asked.
Great. So we're going to see some of these things, kind of a good lesson learned from this project that we're going to be collaborating with.
Absolutely.
Another one is, Shivam, do you see a role for demographic data, i.e. Stats Canada, to be integrated with DER data sets?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. We talk about transactive energy a lot. What is transactive energy but the willingness to measure how people are going to participate, right? What their preferences are. When we piloted the peer-to-peer energy trading strategies, we needed to model user behavior, what their preferences are, what their homes look like, what is their willingness to participate. We're, for example, in Ontario, a summer peaking province, right? But what really is your willingness if it's 35 degrees outside and you're your temperature thermostat set at 25. For what amount of money are you willing to keep that at 25, or do you need your cooling energy right away? So the integration of these data sets to inform these bidding preferences that will in turn lead to more local energy markets, that's exactly what we need. So I'm really excited. I think the IESO is participating in a project with the Lexicon that it's going to trial some sort of residential energy trading. We've done that as well. We've got a bunch of data. We've actually disseminated a whole bunch of knowledge on this topic. We take a lot of pride in our knowledge dissemination. We've published a couple of journal papers, technical reports, and YouTube animated videos, which I can send the link out to later. You'll find more data related to exactly the question that you asked and how we're enabling bidding strategies to be protected in reference so that LDCs can also look at what's available and how reliable it is.
So this is I actually really love this next question. Do you see the Uber and Lyft drivers switching to EVs and then making more driving to the loads than driving people?
That's a wonderful question. Not quite yet. I do think, like in what Brian said earlier, batteries will take on the bulk of the capacity stuff. So, but it is a very, very interesting use case. It might be used for emergency situations, in which case the incentive would be much higher. So I don't think they'll drop their passenger and then go to the load, only in certain emergency situations. A relevant case, I think, was the Princeton microgrid when Hurricane Katrina was going on. Through their natural gas CHP, they were able to completely keep their campus going. And even when the power kind of came back on, I believe their system operator allowed them to continue providing that service to the grid. So similarly, and they get paid a lot of money for that, of course. So if the business case is there, I believe it will be okay, but I don't think it's going to be a conventional thing. Only in emergency situations.
So it'll be economic. So you're not going to see so many people boot people right out of their cars mid for demand response event. So Charles W. asks, Shivam, regarding blockchain, has the high energy usage for transactions been taken into account? Have you estimated how much energy may be wasted?
Yeah, wonderful question. I get this one all the time. So let's dig right into it. Blockchain has a lot of overhead because instead of one person validating your transaction, you have n number of people validating your transaction. But the energy consumption that you're talking about is mostly associated with permissionless, completely decentralized blockchain, similar to Bitcoin. So one Bitcoin transaction takes 610 kilowatt hours to confirm. That's monthly. That's like 3 houses worth of data monthly. So that's ridiculous. So any peer-to-peer energy trading scheme is completely invalidated. The blockchains that we use are more permissioned blockchains, where not everybody in the network is validating your transaction. Instead, we have a set of trusted nodes. In our estimation, that will be the LDCs, the DERMS vendors, and the regulator. So just 6 or 7 nodes in the network. So we ran our blockchain on a single desktop computer, standard i7, 4 gigs of RAM, and it had no impact on the energy. Again, because the consensus process that we're using is not built on hundreds of people trying to validate that, just on 3 or 4.
You know, one thing, you kind of mentioned something about Bitcoin, which I always find interesting, where it's such a high energy intensive currency. But in this new DR, and you mentioned peer-to-peer trading, right? Do we create a new currency just based on more efficiency or more efficient energy usages? But that's forward-thinking thought for a lot later. So Shivam, how can you be technology agnostic when the flexibility reliability relation is different for different technologies? So I'm not sure that's a question for yourself or for ISO or for the sector in general, but maybe why don't you take a stab at that one?
Right. So our perspective, again, we're a technology provider, we're a DERMS vendor. So when we talk about technology agnostic, we talk about the tenets of transactive energy that are all about making DER integration seamless. So we refer to that as interoperability. So if we can take different sets of inverters and combine them and make it easy for people to integrate their stuff, I think that's what we view as technology agnostic. Now, I'll try to answer your question as well when it comes up the stream and we start providing those services to the grid. I believe that from the ISO perspective, what they're looking for at the end of the day, especially from a capacity point of view or a flexibility, is we contracted this amount to this person and this was delivered at this time. It doesn't really matter what the makeup of those DERs, and I think Randolph measured this earlier, in case it could be diesel or it could be batteries, V2G, but the responsibility of the DERMS vendor or the DER aggregator is to, within their mathematical algorithms, provide that to the ISO or the LDC. So that's what we mean by agnostics. How you do that, of course, is based on, you know, what reliable DERs you have and how you're using them and what their individual preferences are, but that's what algorithms are used for. So that, I think, would be my answer to your question. I hope it answered or shed some light on it.
Fantastic, fantastic insight as always. So we're almost going to be winding down. So this very last question I'm going to pose to you. And for all those with questions, apologies that we couldn't get to them all, but Shivam, give us the outlook in 5 years. Where do you think Ontario is going to be? What's the vision of Ontario when it comes to DERs?
Right. So I think over the next 5-10 years, and we are heading towards it, we're going to have a more holistic, more flexible power system that are enabling services from DERs. I do believe we'll shift to a more service-oriented industry where we can use DERs to provide value behind the meter and in front of the meter, and by bundling various services together to provide not just acceptable, but optimal power flow. I think there's a great responsibility as the energy value chain grows. There's different players. There's DER vendors. The ISO is also decentralizing with their controls. There's a great opportunity for all of us to really get into the mix and contribute. I'm really excited by the partnership announced by Catherine and Kieran today. For example, peer-to-peer energy trading, this is something that we're working on, but it's not supported by a regulatory at all. But now with regulatory oversight, this has been missing. We can bake those policies right into our code, right into our software. It gives us confidence as technology providers that are going to build products that are going to last and provide value to the Ontario power system. That's something that I definitely think is going to be the future. And generationally, I think the last generation, the generation followed the load. I really hope in the next sort of 5-10 years, we will be empowered enough to follow the generation, find the peaks and valleys with the load and generation, and make energy conscious decisions that delivers value to all of us across the value chain.
Thanks, Shivam. Honestly, thanks for this conversation. Every time I talk to you, I'm always something new. That's why I love talking to you, and I block from you as well too. With that said, just a quick plug, make sure you tune in this afternoon at 1:30 for the DER roadmap engagement. And for those that are kind of following and tracking a lot of information, the big news around the Grid Innovation Fund, you'll learn a little bit more about that, along with the entire umbrella of DERs as part of enabling resources. So with that said, Colin, I'm handing this back to you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody.